done that way. Well, tonight, what we're going to talk about is emergency communications. One of the things that after we've taken care of water and food and 72-hour kits and supplies and things like that, one of the things that we need to do is to be able to communicate with those around us in the outside world. Communications is as old as man is. We've learned to speak, and then we had to figure out how to carry our voices and carry that message farther than the human voice would transmit. So after being able to transmit one's own voice, they turned to other things like drums and things like that, so you could communicate over longer and longer distances. They would have runners and things like that. Fire lights, placing fires on the Great Wall of China. They would have fire towers where there were light towers, and that would alert the armies that there were enemies afoot and where they would go to. And so, and other things like smoke signals and using mirrors and things like that to illuminate the ways to be able to communicate over great distances farther than a voice could travel or a man could easily run on foot. By the way, that's why we have the marathon today. For those of you who may not know where that came from, it was a military runner who was communicating information from one part to another. He was running to the city of from Marathon. Yeah, went from Marathon to Athens, which is 27.2, whatever how far it was. He ran with the information that they were under siege, delivered his message, and then croaked. So why anybody would sign up to do that, I have no idea. That makes really no. We're celebrating some guy who ran really far and then died. Anyway, so these things have been used in times past to communicate our wants, feelings, desires, or making alerts over distances. Well, most of us would have no idea if somebody put a fire on a tower. We would probably be scared. I have no idea how to make smoke signals. I have a mirror, and I can do that, but that's only good for line of sight when the sun is up and something else. So we have other inventions. Alexander Graham Bell had taken the telegraph information and turned it into a telephone, allow us to transmit the human voice over a wire. And that has progressed over the years until we were able to send it down glass rods. How that works, I don't know. Actually, I do. And satellites, we're able to communicate instantly around the world. Most of us carry a little pocket radio with us that communicates with the world, that can be done via radio waves and ground waves and signals and satellites and everything else. Do you realize that most of you carry a little radio with you? It's called a cell phone. You don't really think of it that way, but that's what it is. It's a little mini radio. So we have the radios like that. We have other communications tools at our discretion, modern tools that we all come to rely on day in, day out. We think nothing about picking up the phone and making a telephone call. We think nothing about picking up a cell phone, making a telephone call, using satellites, the internet, all of these technologies that we have. Well, the question is, how much will we be able to rely on those technologies if a disaster or emergency should occur? Well, generally thinking, let's talk about what happens if we have what happens here in Southern California, and that's usually an earthquake. That's probably the major disaster that we face in this area. Earthquake happens, power goes out. Power goes out, most of us have wireless phones in our house. Those wireless phones are plugged into the wall. No power, no wireless phone, no phone service. So unless you have a phone somewhere in your house like this, either that you're utilizing on a regular basis or have as a backup storage someplace like that, you won't be able to make a phone call from your own home. Most of us have wireless phones. Having one of these around in an emergency, and right now, you can buy them for nothing. $3 or $4 you can get one. And just have it stored away someplace that you plug in. The phone company, most of the power that comes from the phone company is not on the electrical grid that powers our lights in our houses. Even if they are in a secondary way, most of the little local buildings have huge banks of batteries in them as battery backup. That's the good news. The bad news is, what happens in an earthquake? Phones get knocked off the bedside stands, and now they're off the hook. The phone company can only handle about 10% of the phones being used at any particular time. Any more than that, there's nothing there. You can't use it. And so a lot of the times during an earthquake, phones are knocked off. In fact, one of the things, we've gone to a seminar, one of the things they said is walk around and put phones back on the, first thing you do is put the phone back on the hook. Because as soon as you take the phone off the hook, even though it's not making a call to anywhere, it's tying up the line and not allowing you or anyone else to make the phone calls. What's the other thing that happens during an earthquake? I don't know if this happens to you, but if you have relatives out of state, and one happens at like 3 o'clock in the morning, it's 6 a.m., 7 a.m. there, they're waking up for the day, news comes on, big earthquake in California, it's happening in Glendale, big earthquake of 3.2, that ain't even worth getting out of bed for. But my mother-in-law invariably calls, I just heard on the news that you had an earthquake. I went and bought her a map, said, okay, if it's not within 5 miles of me, and if it's not above a 5, don't call me, ain't nothing happening. So people are calling in usually. And or, the other aspect is people calling out. And so those things tie up the phone lines. So you're probably not going to be able to use a phone during an emergency. Then you say, ha-ha, what about a cell phone? Cell phones are not attached to any particular landline. They're not powered by the power that powers my lights. Au contraire, most of them are. Most of the phone companies now are trying to have battery backups and stuff for their cell services. But they are powered, most of them, by the power that powers our lights. So a lot of systems, if the power goes out, so your cell phone. Now if the power doesn't go out, there are some cell phone companies that they don't use, the cell phone signal goes from your cell phone to a little tower somewhere. That tower then takes that signal, puts it into a phone line on the ground, and out it goes. Well, if it's tied up with all of those, then this ain't going to work much either. But some of them don't rely on ground signal cables. They send the signal, if you'll notice the cell site, you'll see like a little microwave dish on it. You'll see some of those. They send their information via microwave dishes to central locations. The only problem is in earthquakes, the towers go. And if they're just a little off kilter, those little microwave dishes don't line up anymore. And so it makes it difficult to get cell signals out. About 18 months ago, January of 2007, we were graced by one of the victims of Katrina, who was in Mississippi. He's now the stake president of the stake in there. He was a bishop, and now he's the stake president. Came and spoke to us. And he said it was really kind of interesting that there was only basically one cell site that was still up in the area, and every morning it would just be surrounded with people trying to get in to try to get on their phone call. I don't know if you know anything about cellular service, but the reason they call it cellular service is because they take the same 300 channels and break them up into different cells. And so each cell tower divides the signal in 3 different directions. And so that only means like 100 and I don't remember the math exactly, but it's like 120 signals in one direction. That means, but since it has to go from here to there and there to here, that only means 75 phone calls in any one direction on a cell phone. So if you have 100 people all set together, it ain't going to work. So what can you use during an emergency? How could you make this work? Well, if you do not know how to text message, learn. Because text messaging works on a different system, or on the same system, but in a completely different way than a normal cellular service works.